Here in John 10, the Lord gives the metaphor about the door and the good shepherd. The whole passage goes from 10:1 through 10:21, but we're just going to look at this first part in this recording, John 10:1 through 6. The comment in 10:21 about the healing of the blind man shows us that this teaching from the Lord certainly took place after chapter 9, where that blind man was healed, but there's no explicit transition between chapter 9 and chapter 10. In other words, the relationship between 10:1 through 21 and chapter 9 isn't explained by the Apostle John, except that 9 was first and then 10, chronologically. In both these sections, we see the attitude of the Jewish religious leaders. Both these two sections also contrast the Lord's attitude and the attitude of those Jewish religious leaders. In chapter 9, we see portrayed vividly that they did not seek the truth, and they were harsh with the man who was healed, who clearly was seeking the truth. In this passage, they are called thieves and robbers. Now, in several Old Testament passages, Jewish religious leaders are called shepherds and are rebuked. Those passages must be the background of this section. You can see Jeremiah 23:1 through 4, or Jeremiah 25:32 through 38. You can also look at Zechariah 11. You can look at Isaiah 56:9 through 12. In Psalm 80, verse 1, God is the shepherd of Israel. And of course, the famous Psalm 23, verse 1, and also Isaiah 40, verse 11. And in Ezekiel 34:20 through 24, God promised to place a shepherd among them because the sheep of Israel had been victimized by the shepherds of Israel. That shepherd, who is referred to as David, is the Messiah. So there's a lot of Old Testament background behind the Lord saying that he's the good shepherd. And actually, it's not just Old Testament background. In the Greek world, too, leaders were sometimes referred to as shepherds. Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks in the Iliad, that as they were attacking Troy, Agamemnon was referred to as shepherd. That's a good Greek word, poimen. So now, the good shepherd. Well, through the metaphor of shepherding, the Lord contrasts himself, the good shepherd, with the leaders of Israel, the bad shepherds, and specifically the men of darkness of chapter 8 and chapter 9. They are thieves and robbers. He is the door. He is the good shepherd. He also uses the metaphor of the good shepherd to teach about his sacrificial death. So before we jump into verse 1, let's look at a simple overview of chapter 10, verses 1 through 21. In verses 1 through 6, which we will look at in this recording, the Lord Jesus is the shepherd. In verses 7 through 10, the Lord Jesus is the door. In verses 11 through 18, the Lord Jesus again is the shepherd, the good shepherd. And then verses 19 through 21 have the divided response of the people as they have heard these teachings. Now, here in this passage, you've got the image of the Lord Jesus both as shepherd and also the door of the sheep pen. And it's a little bit hard to hold these side by side logically. Is he the shepherd or is he the door? Well, he is portrayed as both. But this really shouldn't trouble the reader. Note that the Lord is the bread of life in 6:35 and that he gives the bread of life in 6:51. Note that in 8:45 he speaks the truth, but in 14:6 he is the truth. So there's some flexibility in these things. So now, chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, we have a veiled expression, the Lord as shepherd and the robbers. The Lord Jesus, he uses several figures of speech that relate to shepherding to teach about himself and his work. Shepherding was very common in that era and in that region, so the images used in this section were familiar to the first readers. In 9:39 through 41, the Lord Jesus said that those who reject him were blind. They do not seek the truth. Here in this section, the Lord develops that idea further. Here they're called thieves and robbers. Chapter 10, verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, the one that does not enter into the sheep pen through the door, but climbs up some other way, that one is a thief and a robber. This word sheep pen. The Greek word is aule, and it can refer to any kind of building or even a courtyard. In Mark 15:16, it refers to the praetorian, which was the governor's official residence in Jerusalem. In Revelation 11:2, the outer aule of the temple is mentioned, so there it refers to a courtyard. It's used several times in the Gospels to refer to the courtyard of the high priest. But here and in verse 16, the aule of the sheep is a sheep pen. The word door here, thura, it could also be translated gate in the context of a sheep pen. So without any explanatory transition, this chapter begins with a very negative assessment of the leaders of Israel, some of whom we just met in the previous chapter. We know about them. The sheep pen described in this section is a place that protects the sheep from thieves and bad weather and wolves. It was not possible for thieves and robbers to come through the door because there would be a guard or a doorkeeper there. Now, thinking about the culture at that time and in that place, a family might have its own sheep pen, and that would be a courtyard surrounded by various parts of their house where that household's sheep would be kept safe. Alternatively, there might be a separate sheep pen used for several families' sheep. A sheep pen like that would be guarded by a doorkeeper. Jewish religious leaders were pictured as thieves and robbers, just like the leaders of Israel in the time of the prophets. Part of Ezekiel's prophecy against the shepherds of Israel is, "The exhausted you have not strengthened, and the sick you have not healed, and the broken you have not bound, and the banished you have not brought back, and the lost you have not sought, but with force and ruthlessness you have ruled them." That's Ezekiel 34, verse 4. Chapter 10, verse 2. But the one that enters through the door is the shepherd of the sheep. In strong contrast to those thieves and robbers, there is one that enters through the door. He is the shepherd of the sheep. Chapter 10, verse 3. For him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. Of course, we should be careful not to push the metaphor too hard, but it is possible that the doorkeeper here might refer to God the Father. In the Middle East, a shepherd stands outside the sheep pen and calls his own sheep. The sheep know their shepherd's voice, and they come out to their respective shepherds. There are shepherds in the Middle East who give names to each of their sheep, and the sheep come out when their name is called. The Lord Jesus also calls us by name, and we come out of the sheep pen. This reminds us of verses like John 6:65, and he was saying, "Because of this I have said to you, that no one is able to come to me unless it has been given to him by my Father." Chapter 10, verse 4. And when he has taken out his own sheep, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice. The sheep pen was safe but dirty. Besides that, there was neither water nor grass in it. The sheep must be taken out to drink and to eat. Middle Eastern shepherds walk in front of the flock. In like manner, the Lord Jesus goes on ahead of us. We could understand this to mean he never asks of us more than what he himself has done. And this is a model to be followed. Christian leaders should never ask of their flock what they themselves do not do. Speaking of these sheep, they follow him, not because he was master over them, but because they know his voice. They follow him because of a personal relationship. Chapter 10, verse 5, but they will certainly not follow a stranger, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. The word translated stranger and strangers in this verse, it is allotrios, which more literally translated would be of another. The man whose eyes were healed in chapter 9 is an example of this spiritual truth. He is one of the sheep of the Lord Jesus, and he rejects the Jewish leaders who investigate his case. Chapter 10, verse 6. Jesus spoke this veiled expression to them, but they did not know what it was that he was saying to them. The word translated veiled expression, paroimia, is only used in John 10:6 and 16:25 and 16:29, and also 2 Peter 2:22. A similar word, parabole, is used 50 times in the Synoptic Gospels and in Hebrews 9:9 and 11:19. But that word parabole is not used at all in the Gospel of John. So we can say there are no parables in the Gospel of John. When we say that, we mean there are no examples of the parabole. But here we do have this word paroimia, which sort of has a very similar meaning. And this word is only used in John and 2 Peter. Well, this portion closes with an explanation by John. In 8:43, the Lord Jesus said, "Why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to hear my word." In 10:4, he said that the sheep know his voice. The people he is speaking to in this passage likewise can't understand because they're not his sheep. So, by way of summary, chapter 10, 1 through 6, the Lord has given most of the ideas that he will soon develop, but in this veiled expression passage, they don't really understand him. His words will be more clear and more specific in the following verses.